Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Hello Kitty World, brought to us by Packsoft Nautica and Charactersoft. Hello Kitty World is actually the first Hello Kitty game, though not the first video game featuring a character from the Sanrio universe. Here we go with Hello Kitty World for the Nintendo Famicom. This version I am playing is a fan-translated version, though there isn't much text in the game, other than a few things in the menus, like here where we select 1 or 2 players, as well as a bit of text during the game's ending. Immediately, what you'll notice is what most interested me about this game, and that's that it very much looks like the classic NES game Balloon Fight. And that's because it is. Well, it sort of is. Hello Kitty World is actually kind of a port of a Game Boy game called Balloon Kid. This game was actually an official sequel for the original Balloon Fight. It's actually a really fun game, though it never saw release for the Game Boy in Japan. It did get a release years later for the Game Boy Color in Japan, but prior to that, in 1992, for whatever reason, they decided to take the Sanrio character of Hello Kitty and take that Balloon Kid game for the Game Boy and port it to the Famicom and actually released it in Japan, though this game never made it to North America. So if you've ever played Balloon Kid on the Game Boy, you've essentially played Hello Kitty World on the Famicom. It is a little bit different, graphics have been changed up a bit, but even the songs are the same as you heard with the Balloon Fight-like beginning of the song we hear at the beginning of level 1, and we'll also hear again in level 8. Throughout the levels, your goal is just to get Hello Kitty from one end of the stage to the other. Interestingly enough, you go from right to left instead of from left to right like traditional platformers in this game. Every so often you'll come across a bonus game, in which case your goal is to collect as many of the balloons as possible, and if you miss one, you end up losing the bonus game, but if you're able to collect all of them, you'll be granted an extra life. The best strategy I found for this bonus game is kind of getting a lot of speed, and you'll be able to kind of like bounce off the walls. As you can see here, I'm able to cover a pretty good amount of distance. That bounce off of the left or right wall gives me enough momentum in the opposite direction to kind of easily get to whatever balloons I need to grab. Now, when it comes to jumping and actually controlling your flight, you can either hold down the button or tap it in order to kind of just lightly press it to fly up, so whichever one you end up preferring. Now, in the levels, you've seen all the extra balloons that are flying around, and when you collect enough of them, you'll get kind of bumped up, and the balloons all become a double balloon with one red and one white balloon, which ends up netting you more points, and this goes on until you end up losing your first balloon. Once a set of balloons go off screen, it'll end up resetting. The same goes, of course, if you end up losing a life. Health is a little bit weird in Hello Kitty World. You have your 2 balloons that you start off with, as well as Hello Kitty herself. If you end up getting hit directly by certain attacks, you'll instantly end up dying, though a lot of enemies in the game will just end up popping one of your balloons. Once you've ended up popping both of your balloons, you'll have to get some more by inflating them by hitting the down button on the D-pad over and over again until you inflate a balloon, and then you can use it to fly around. If you don't get a balloon in time, you just kind of have your normal running and jumping, which allows Hello Kitty to move pretty fast, but unfortunately you don't have that much control, and the jumping can be a bit difficult to nail where you're trying to go, unlike when of course you have the slow movement of the balloons. When you reach the end of a level, you'll have a big arrow pointing to the left to signify that you're finally at the end of the stage, plus the screen will stop scrolling. The game is broken up into 8 different levels, with every other level being a boss encounter, so levels 2, 4, 6, and 8. After completing a level, you'll get the same celebration each time, so it kind of goes really slow, so I'll only show it really one time, but basically Hello Kitty flies in, and then gets to celebrate with all the symbols floating around. This will change up as we have different symbols for the different levels that we have to complete, but it's pretty much the same thing, so I'll be skipping it from here on out. You'll also get a racking up of all the points that you've earned during the stage and then move on to the next level. The levels are of course increasing in difficulty, and this is not an easy game for sure. There's a lot of difficulty, especially later on, as it's easy to get hit by an enemy and end up instantly dying even if you end up having balloons, because stuff like the electricity or fire can directly kill Hello Kitty. A lot of time, the best strategy I find is getting as much of the screen open as you can possibly get, so you can kind of see everything in front of you, and then decide to attack wherever you're going to go, whether you're going to go high, low, in between, or whatever you decide to do as far as getting around a lot of the obstacles. Now, sometimes you'll have to work quicker than others. Early on, things are thankfully slow, but as we progress in the game, the levels get a lot quicker, so you'll have to problem solve a lot faster. Enemies and other hazards will come at you, of course, in the same patterns each time you play, so a lot of the game is memorization of knowing what's ahead of you and making sure that you have at least the most amount in front of you exposed so that you kind of have an idea of what you're about to jump into. In tight spaces, you'll have to release your balloons, in which case you'll have to, of course, pump new ones when you end up getting through that tight space, but also when you end up dropping the balloons, of course, you're going to be more vulnerable to attacks. Every so often, a balloon with the letter P on it will appear, and if you're able to grab it, you'll be invulnerable for a period of time. What I love about it is the screen also scrolls a little bit faster. Since you're able to take everything out, the game doesn't have to slow down in order for you to have a chance. You're going to bulldoze through everything, so make sure you grab these in order to kind of speed some of these slower moving levels along. Of course, once your invincibility and all runs out, you'll want to be very careful to get away from any enemy that you may be close to. Make sure you also, of course, at all times, you're high above the water level below, because you do have the classic giant fish, just like in the original balloon fight, that will pop out of the water in most areas and be able to grab you and pull you under. Once we make it up here, we're going to let go of our balloons and drop on down and go through another one of the bonus rooms that's located down here. Since I've already showed the bonus game one time, I'm just going to let one of the balloons kind of go up to the top, and that will automatically fail us, but will allow us to continue on the level. Once back in the stage, we're just a little bit past where we just were a few moments ago, and we're going to continue on. We're going to float up, watching out for these flying enemies that are going to come straight across, and when we get to here, we're going to have our first boss encounter. Now, for the boss encounters, most of them you're just going to be jumping on top of them, just like you would a classic Mario game. This can be a little bit finicky, though, at times, though thankfully this boss is very easy to get used to it. We're going to make sure we don't have any balloons, and this will allow us to easily land on top of them, and we just kind of run off the platform multiple times, as you can see. Just wait a second after landing on them, and then repeat, and you'll be able to hit them all 3 times that you need to, before he's able to really do anything. Once he's defeated, we get to the exit, and we're moving on to the next level. The next level is a tropical-themed stage. As you can see, there's some palm trees down below, and there's new enemies that are going to be introduced throughout the level. While the game doesn't do anything special with the graphics, I do like the background objects. A lot of them have some really strong borders around them that really end up making them stand out. And the game does a decent enough job with the color palette, the very limited color palette of the NES. Be careful when you make it to this part. We're going to drop down, and as we're collecting some extra balloons and such, thankfully we're able to get one of the P balloons, so we have that power-up invincibility for a bit. You just want to be careful that you don't end up running into those spikes that you can see lining that first part of that area. Grab that heart so we get an extra one up here, and very easy to build up some extra lives pretty early on in the game. Especially with long areas like this where you have the invincibility and just easily collectible objects so you can build up those points. A lot of times, the enemies, as you can see, will end up pushing you more so than actually popping your balloon. You actually have to make a kind of direct hit on the balloon. When it comes to hitting you, though, some enemies can kill you, and other ones will just push you around. So you kind of have to get used to each enemy and know which ones are going to be more of a threat than others. Here, I'm just going to wait for some of the screen to kind of fully be shown and allow me to kind of get underneath, watching out for the fish that's kind of jumping out at me. Different looking fish than the one from Balloon Fight, but still kind of the same premise of having fish. If you get too close to the water, you will have them kind of get up. Now, the very end of the stage is kind of funny. You have a giant whale with its mouth open. Entering inside of the whale's mouth will take you to the next level. As you can see, the next stage is actually really cool. You have a nice, like, pink background and stuff, but you have all these teeth that are, of course, on the ceiling because we're inside the whale. The whale ends up having a lot more teeth than it should, and, you know, all that kind of stuff. You know, the game takes a lot of liberties as far as being inside of a, I guess, a standard whale, but still, kind of a cool overall stage. While there's been a few games that have had levels inside of whales, for me, the very first instance I remember, of course, was Star Tropics, playing through that, and you're inside of the whale in the submarine, and it's a big maze that you have to get through, and it's actually pretty tricky. It took me a long time as a kid to finally be able to navigate that maze in Star Tropics inside the whale without getting too lost. Be careful here, you will have some of the teeth breaking apart that will kind of fall down on you like spikes, so make sure that you get away from them. Here you have a very tight fit that you can kind of get through. If you do a running jump without the balloons, you can kind of get in there, but it's a bit tricky to do so. You can still easily, though, get to the bonus room that's located up here if you want to. Just to kind of keep things moving and all, just skip the bonus game though, but I wanted to make sure I grabbed that balloon so that I don't end up missing it and resetting my bonuses. The hardest part, of course, about the level is because of the teeth, you want to make sure that you don't go too high up that you end up popping balloons that way. There's not a lot of solid ground in a large portion of the level, so it's more critical that you don't end up losing any of your balloons during it. Up above here at the top of the screen, you can go through here if you want another bonus game, but we're going to skip that like we've been doing, and just focus on the bottom portion. Have to wait a little bit, though, for the screen to start to finally scroll on by, so that we can continue on. Unfortunately, this is one of those games, because it's always auto-scrolling, you do have periods where you're kind of just sitting there and waiting for the action to continue. Though it does work as a nice breather after more intense areas. Thankfully, we get enough of the things here, so we're able to get another one of those P balloons and invincibilities, and this is really helpful here, as we're able to get through a large amount of enemies and hazards. Once the invincibility runs out here, this whole area, for the most part, you can kind of float just above the enemies and just below the spikes. Get into a nice kind of rhythm of pressing the float button, or whatever you like to call it, jump button, so that you're able to kind of stay right in a nice spot. We are nearing the end of the level here, just a little bit longer here, as we have this platform here, and there's going to be another platform just ahead of us that will be showing up, and the boss is actually in the water between these two platforms. Now, for this boss, what we're going to do is basically the same thing as we did before, but the last boss is kind of like running on his head. We do have to make jumps here, though, in order to land on him, and you want to make sure that he's in the air before you end up jumping on him. Just like the last boss, 3 hits and he'll be defeated. You may need to pump up a couple of extra balloons just to get across that last gap again, so that you can make it to the exit and move on to the next stage. As we begin the next level, we actually pop out of the whale's mouth. I guess the whale eventually turned around and now spit us out, going now to the left, just like we have been in the other levels. This is Stage Umbrella, because of course there's not numbered levels or levels named after letters. They're instead named after objects in Hello Kitty World, so we have Umbrella Stage. As you can see, there are rain clouds in the background and a couple of new enemies and hazards introduced, but pretty much it's more of what we've been dealing with. A little bit easier that you don't have the spikes at the top because the teeth aren't here, but the rain will push you down. Just make sure that you don't get too low so that you're near the top of the water at the bottom of the screen, so that the rain will push you that last little bit that it would need to into it, so that you end up losing a life. But really the rain clouds for the most part aren't too much of a threat. Now these, the lightning spewing clouds and their projectiles that bounce all around, they are more of a hazard for sure. After we get a little bit into the stage with the lightning clouds start to go, and you'll also see the kind of spinning, rotating things here, very reminiscent of the classic balloon fight, especially in this level. We also get rewarded here with another invincibility balloon and an extra 1-up, so we're able to just kind of send all of those things away, that we can just kind of knock them off. It's kind of funny that instead of just kind of going through the hazards, you just kind of get rid of them altogether. I always like games where you're able to kind of do that stuff that you normally wouldn't be able to kill or take out, but if you have invincibility, you can kind of knock into it and it'll actually go away instead of having you just run through it. Now this is where the game starts to ramp up in difficulty. The kind of paths you'll have to take between a lot of the kind of hazards, these rotating spikes, are going to get harder and harder as we make it farther into this level. Thankfully though, we have gotten a lot of extra lives built up going into the stage, so we have a fair amount if we needed them, and you probably will end up losing quite a bit of lives your first time going through that stage if you're not prepared. Now, the game does not get easier from here. This level, the Snowman stage, as you can see, is a ice-themed level. We have ice cream cones kind of attached to the ceiling in a lot of areas that will end up popping your balloons. Over here to the left, you will have to let go of your balloons and kind of sneak on through here. Just kind of move slowly because there are enemies, these little walking flames, coming towards you, so you'll have to wait a few moments and then jump over them. Your control as Hello Kitty on the ground itself without the balloons is already slippery, so with the ice it's not going to help things either. Unfortunately, you'll have to make a leaping jump. You won't have time to pump up extra balloons. A lot of times I'll just kind of pump up extra balloons for the heck of it because I'm just kind of killing time waiting for the screen to scroll enough so that at least I'm able to see where I need to attempt my next kind of jumps. Here, this is another good area where you want to wait a little bit so you can kind of see where you're going to be going and then run across. Make sure that you're ready to jump as soon as you get across the bridge though, because a penguin will be coming your way. You can land on top of the penguin safely, but you have to make sure that you're prepared for that. Now, finally, we're actually going to use some balloons and start flying once again over to this area. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's hard to kind of maintain both balloons, so anytime you get the opportunity to land on solid ground, use it, and make sure that you get another balloon ready. If you do need it, there is the moving ice at the bottom of the screen. You can land on that if you want, but most part I will just kind of keep floating and only land on it if I absolutely need to try to pump up an extra emergency balloon. Here you get a tiny breather, as you can kind of wait on this platform for a little bit, and the screen will start to scroll before we have to continue on through the same kind of little area that we just did a moment ago. Just be careful of the penguins. They will be able to pop your balloons if they run into them, as well as, of course, there's ice cream cones or spikes at the top of the ceiling. Make sure you watch out for those. Over here, be careful. You may want to get rid of your balloons so that you can kind of sneak through the little openings. And then pump up a couple more. You can fly up to the top if you want to get another one of the bonus rooms. Just past the bonus room, you'll see the background color change. And this is signifying we're near the end of the level. Just a little bit longer to go before we end up making it to the next boss encounter. As we enter into here, you can see the boss. It's going to be a snowman. Not really that shocking here. But the deal with him, we have to wait for the screen to fully scroll over, and then he'll start to move. Wait for him to start coming towards us. Eventually, he will kind of take the bucket off of his head and throw it towards you. When he does this, this will be your opportunity to jump on his head in order to attack him. The more space that you have between you and him when he throws the bucket, of course, the farther the bucket will go out, and the more opportunity you will have to land on him. Same rules apply as always though, 3 hits on him and he'll be defeated, and we're moving on to the next level. The next level is Stage Mouse, or Mouse Stage. Either way, it's more of a cave-like setting. There's still, of course, plenty of water, because that's pretty much this entire game. Also, of course, spikes are still going to be lining on the ceiling, just to try to make things a little bit more challenging for you. Right here, it can be difficult to really have any place to kind of safely land and be able to get your balloons built back up, because of the enemies and also now spikes that are also on the ground. Thankfully, after a little bit, we can land safely, and we're going to use that opportunity to immediately pump up a balloon before taking flight once again. It really doesn't take long, of course, for me to end up bumping right into a wall and going right into one of the bat enemies that they kind of go in this circle that can be difficult to dodge, more so in a game like this, because of the scrolling of the screen. They get a little bit more opportunities, I think, to potentially run into you. Right after that segment, make sure that you have both balloons ready, and then you're going to go through this area pretty quickly because there's going to be spikes falling on you, and spikes on the ceiling and ground again. Things don't get any easier as we continue. You have jumping flames that are going to come towards you, as well as if you go too high, you're going to be popping the balloons, of course, on those spikes. A lot of what I try to do is get as many of the balloons and such, and hope that one of those P balloons with the invincibility end up showing up during these areas to really end up helping me out. Here, I usually end up losing a balloon, but you can grab a couple of the other ones right there, and you can land back on the platform you were on if you want to re-get your balloon pumped back up. Of course, there's the bonus game located at the top of the screen as well if you want to do that. We don't have too much longer here in the stage, just kind of one big, long, winding corridor with a couple more rotating bats. Just try to avoid them if possible. Thankfully, you have the option right beforehand to build up those balloons, but right at the end here, we can land safely on this platform and pump up another balloon if you want to, but you are at the end of the level, and you can just kind of make that last little jump, and we're moving on to the next stage. So here it is, the final level of the game. You can see it's kind of a giant factory. There's kind of like Lego blocks or whatever kind of blocks on the ground, as well as you can see a lot of other contraptions. They're going to be trying to stop us. The conveyor belts will push and pull you in the different directions, and they do move pretty fast, so you have to be really careful. Right up here, we're going to immediately lose the balloons and have to go through a couple of little winding corridors. Jump over this gap, and once you get through, you're going to wait on this platform that will start to rise, and as it rises, then you'll have the opportunity to pump up the balloons so that you can then continue on. Be careful of the spiked things that are moving back and forth. Thankfully, you can kind of see where they're going to go as they've nicely outlined the track they take. Wait for a bunch of the screen to scroll so that you have a good idea of what's ahead of you as you have a lot of these things moving, and then wait for that right spot and time it, and you can just kind of sneak through. It's a little bit difficult, but as long as you have both balloons, you should be able to get through. You will have to lose the balloons right after, though, in order to jump up and go into this corridor. As you can see, things are pretty tight in here. You have these blades that are moving up and down, or whatever they're supposed to be. You can kind of run into them from the sides, but they will pop the balloons if you run underneath of them. Also, of course, be careful that you don't fall down into the couple of fire pits. On this conveyor belt, you also want to make sure that you don't stay too long on it, as there will be that one set of fire in the middle of it, and then right after that you'll jump over and you go through a small little opening. Wait for the screen to kind of scroll so that you don't have to deal with the conveyor belt much, and that the space next to the fire is already open so that when you get on the conveyor belt you'll be able to safely jump over, land, and be able to get your balloons going again before we take flight for the next segment. One of the hardest enemies in the game are these heart boxes that when you get close to them they explode. The four shot projectiles that come out of it can be difficult to dodge, especially with everything else also going on during this segment. These platforms, of course, moving up and down, it's relatively easy to be able to kind of get between them. They don't rise too high up so that you're able to kind of keep going safely across these gaps. Thankfully, this segment right here is actually pretty easy compared to what we're about to run into. Just some fire below and then the one jumping flame that's been going with us. And then when you make it here, though, this is where the fun begins, because you have a whole bunch of the electric currents or whatever going. They're just going in all kinds of different directions. Thankfully, you can see where, of course, they're going to be going, but trying to weave in and out of them. The game slows down a little bit. There's a little bit too much going on for the game to handle. Of course, that actually ends up working out to be a kind of a good thing, because the slowdowns allow you to kind of get a little bit more maneuverability between the electric sparks there. Now through this little area, wait a few moments for the screen to scroll, and you'll start to see that you have a bunch of more quick-moving platforms. Really not anything to really worry about. You can easily get over to the platform on the left. You'll have to get rid of your balloons before then going in. It's now time for the final boss of the game. It's that little trash can that's kind of sitting there. Once again, like the other bosses, you have to wait for the screen to fully scroll over, and then it reveals itself to be a robot. In order to attack it, you have to wait for it to open up its mouth. It'll fire out projectiles, and when it does this, you can then attack it by landing on top of its head. A lot of the way I figured to pretty much do this easily is wait on one side until it stops and starts to get ready to open the mouth, and then you'll be able to quickly jump over it before the projectiles come out. This gives you enough opportunity to then jump back on his head to deliver the hit, and the projectiles will never ever get near you. Now, this boss does take many more hits than the other bosses, but after just a few more, he's defeated, and we can sit back and enjoy the ending to Hello Kitty World. So, there you have it, Hello Kitty World for the Nintendo Famicom, the first ever Hello Kitty game, which is based off a balloon fight sequel and was published by a different company than Nintendo. It's just a very odd entity in the whole kind of realm of video game history, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of like do a video of this game at some point. But yeah, Hello Kitty World it's not an awful game. I always liked Balloon Kid for the Game Boy, so I thought that was such a cool concept that the fact that they pretty much took that game and just turned it into this is just interesting, and it plays pretty much the same. As the credits finish up, we can get one last screen with the end and our characters kind of waving towards us. But with that, guys, that's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.